As you know, Greg talked about this morning, the first thing he talked about is, is we have 2,000 plus decisions to make every spring, right? And how can we streamline that? Because that is a lot, right? And so the best way that we can do that is we can arm ourselves with as much knowledge as we possibly can, so that when it comes time to make those kind of snap decisions, we can do it just like that with a snap, right? Because we know we have the information to be able to back up the decisions that we're going to make. And those are just kind of some basic principles that we're going to go through, right? So the first one is saturated cold germ. Definition of what a saturated cold germ test is. Basically, it's your hybrid's ability to germinate under adverse conditions. And when we talk about adverse conditions, we're talking about cold. We're talking about wet and just not optimal, right? So let's make sure that we know the difference between the two, because you get your seed bag, and on there's going to be an SG percentage, right? Hopefully it's going to be like 95 or 96, right? That's your standard germination rate. So what that tells you is how well your seed's going to germinate in optimum conditions, right? You got soil, it's 55 plus degrees. It's got plenty of moisture in it. It's not completely saturated, but it's moist enough to trigger that seed. And you're hopefully you put 95 or 100 seeds out there, you're going to get at least 96 of them up, 95, 96 of them up. And that's important, right? Because you put all this time into your planter, you put your time and your money and your effort into your planter so that you're going to have that perfect population and spacing and singulation, right? So when I plant 34,000 seeds, I'd like to see 34,000 of them come up, especially if I know that it was a beautiful day and there's a beautiful week coming right after it, right? And so that's important. But the saturated cold germ just takes it just one step farther than that, especially when you get a year like this one where things might not have been quite so optimal, right? It was it's the end of April or it's getting into May. It's the first time you're able to get out. It's still cold, but guess what? You finally get out and it's dry enough for you to run for 2 days, okay? So now it comes down to the choice of what hybrid am I going to put in. And sometimes you might be throwing a gamble on it, but what we're trying to do is empower you to be able to pick the right hybrid to put in at the right time, right? You've got metric wrenches, you've got standard wrenches, you've got big hammers, you've got small hammers, and you're not using all those on the same size stuff. And it's the same thing here. You're not going to put the wrong hybrid out at the wrong time because you know not to do so, right? And the best part about that is the saturated cold germ is testable. So what you do is you send it off to a Midwest Labs or an Illinois Crop Improvement. Obviously those are just our local ones. And they're going to do 3 tests for us. The first one being saturated cold germ. That's basically they're going to put down a tray. They're going to put down 2 towels, saturated, point being saturated, wet towels, a little bit of topsoil on top of that. They'll put the seeds, 100 seeds into that. And then they'll put another saturated towel on top of that, put it into a temperature controlled chamber for 7 days, aka a fridge of some sort, at 50 degrees. End of 7 days, they'll pull that back out, warm it up to 73 to 75 degrees for a few days and count how many of those germinate. 100 seeds, 94 of them come up, saturated cold germ of 94%. Hopefully they'll do multiple 100 samples of that, and that's what you get. And so Greg had 14 hybrids this year, and I think he told us, he said he's at about 85 to 90 is the average for most of his, right? So just give you a point to look at there. He always has a few of them that are in the 90s, so he got a 95 to 99%, kind of his rock stars, and then he's got a couple that are normally down in the 60s. So none of those are bad. Doesn't mean that they're not good hybrids, doesn't mean they're not a racehorse hybrid, but you're going to choose when you're going to use them at a different time because now you have that information. Talking about having 3 tests done. Second test is an accelerated aging test. And what that tells you is how long your seed has been sitting on the shelf. Hopefully the seed company is going to have them in a temperature controlled chamber since the last year to preserve its characteristics and its vigor. But it just allows you to know, say, okay, what happened here? Why do I not have as good of a stand as I wanted to? Well, that's actually a lot of really old seed. Something like that, right? So then the third test is then your pericarp damage score. And this is what also pretty important, especially if you're going to be using starter, right? If you're getting out and you really need to give it that extra vigor, problem is if you have a 30% pericarp damage score and you put starter on that salt's going to get down inside there and it's going to burn the embryo and you're not going to be able to do anything with it, right? You're still going to end up, man, why do I have a 26,000 instead of 35,000 like I planted? Well, probably you burned a whole lot of it, right? And that's just really frustrating when you could have had a perfect stand if you would have just known that it wasn't going to take it well, right? And that's what we're getting to. So even if you're not willing to do that, it's $43 a hybrid, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in just a second. It's $43 a hybrid, not per acre. There's a big difference there. I would encourage you just to save a little bit of your seed back so that you can then go back and test it, even if you're not willing to do it in the forefront, so you can at least do it in the background if you want to. You go out there, you save that seed until July 4th. That way, you come out and you say, man, I just really didn't have the stand I wanted to. Is that because something that I did wrong with my planter? Is there something wrong with my hybrid itself? Do I need to have a conversation with my dealer? Whatever that might be, or at least you're insulating yourself against that so you can actually have the opportunity to go back and look and you can learn Probably should have done it on the forefront. I always recommend you do it on the forefront, but if you don't want to do that, at least do it on the background of it, right? So Nowell and I were talking, so $43 a hybrid, that's not really that bad. You have 10 hybrids, it's $430. I will 100% guarantee you will make that money back within an acre or two, right? Just by having that knowledge. So, but at the same time, so it's kind of a headache. It's going to take you 15 days, 10 to 15 days by the time you actually bag the seed up, send it out, and then get your results back, right? Because it takes them at least 7 to 10 days just to do the test. So I said, we've got a fridge at work. Can we just do this ourselves? Obviously, I can't do the accelerated aging and I can't do the pericarp damage, but I can probably do the saturated cold germ. At least I think I can, right? So what we did, I went online, I found a couple different tests, a couple different ways to do it, and I tried them out. One was a paper towel test. It's very, very similar to the test we laid out earlier. And then I also tried another one out, shoebox method. Actually just use a Tupperware, put some vermiculite in the bottom of it, put some topsoil on top of that, put the seeds in that topsoil, vermiculite again, completely saturated everything, and then put them in the fridge. Both of those back in the fridge. 7 days at 50 degrees, a couple days out, 73, 75. And I just had really, really mixed results. I did it with seeds that we knew exactly what they were because they were lab tested. They're actually the ones that are out here as well, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But I just had really mixed results, and so my point is just for the $43 a hybrid, guarantee yourself the consistency and let a lab do it for you. I'm going to keep playing with it because I want to know, but that would be my recommendation, right? So at that point, basically we said, okay, let's just ground truth this. Let's see what we can do. So we laid out a plot here. I'm going to let Nowell tell you a little bit more about that.
The plot that we have surrounding the tents here, this is our, I might have to turn me down just a little bit. This is our saturated cold germ test. We've got it split into two different planting dates. On my left is our April planting date, which we're calling the cold germination date. And on my right, including the 2 rows in the back, is our warm germination date. So in April, we planted our cold germination plot on April 13th. Ground temperature at planting was 56 degrees and going down. Immediately after planting, we had a week of freezing temperatures, and this farm was burdened with a layer of snow on April 14th. So when Reid talks about severe stress that's tested during the saturated cold germ test, that seed was under high amounts of moisture and a lot of cold. Remember, the magic number for germination is 55 degrees, preferably under 50, seed won't germinate at all. So at 36 hours after planting, when that seed went to take its first drink of water, it was under a lot of stress and had a hard time emerging. In contrast, on our May planting date, I'll turn this just a little bit, I'm not sure you guys can see that down there. In contrast, on our warm planting date, ground temperatures were 62 degrees and going up. We had a lot of warm temperatures the weeks after. Now, we did have a lot of moisture in the ground still in May of this year, on May 16th and that week following, but much more favorable conditions for emergence than in our cold germinated half of the plot. Now, in both dates, we planted 3 different hybrids. Both hybrids were tested at the Illinois Crop Improvement Association in March, and the results of the saturated cold germ test results of those 3 hybrids were 44%, 67%, and 99%. So what that means is out of that 100 seeds Reid mentioned, only 44 of them germinated after the test, compared to 99 for what I think we could call our Eskimo. This guy down here is pretty much a beach bum. We probably shouldn't have put him in the ground in April. So, am I trying to say that he's a bad hybrid and we shouldn't plant him? Well, let's find out. So each one of these rows represents 1/1000th of an acre. So we've got 2 of each hybrid. We took an average across this. We've got the early 99 in the back and the late 99 in the back behind you. And let's see what the numbers tell us. So the whole plot was planted at 35,000 population. And we know that we use 1 ear. We say 1 ear equals 7 bushels at that population. And when we went to count ears on the early corn, we had 24.5 ears that we counted for the 44%. So we lost over 10,000 ears by planting him in April. The 67 did a little better at 26, and our 99, we counted 35 ears. So every seed that we put in the ground popped up back here, even though he got snowed on the day after and he had incurred freezing temperatures. As we moved into March, these numbers improved drastically. We had 31 on the 44, pretty close to the same on the 67, and we lost one on the 99, which we won't concern ourselves with today. So if we were to look at these just a little bit differently from a dollar and put a dollar value on them, I'll pull these 67s out. Let's just say you were trying to decide if planting this in April versus May. We took a 5.5 year hit. So let's keep the math simple, and let's just call it 5 years times 7 bushels. It's 35 bushels an acre. What you lost on that particular hybrid. If you'll give me $4 corn, that's $140 an acre. And if you were being very aggressive on April 12th, the day before you're planting, you said, you know what, we're going to get after it, let's put 500 acres in the ground. If you had that ability, it's a pretty drastic cut. So you took a $70,000 hit in the wrong direction. So, in contrast, if you had said, you know what, we did our homework, we did our saturated cold germ testing, we have the results in, I really wanted that 67 in that field because it's fit to go, but I know we've got inclement weather coming. We're going to do a change up. We're putting the 99 in because he's going to do a lot better. If you did that, you would have added 9 years to the whole population of that field. And I know I don't need to do the math, but that's $126,000 difference just by getting that saturated cold germ testing done. So when Reid talks about $430 for 10 different hybrids, if you're really trying to push your planting dates into some earlier, wetter, colder conditions, it's probably some testing that is going to be worth your while to do. So to finish with that, am I trying to tell you not to plant in early April? No, just know which hybrid to choose and which ones to hold back for later. Now we still had a pretty saturated, rough May, so these numbers could be skewed, you know, a few different times because of those results. But when you take a look over here on my left is the 67%, and on my right is the 67% warm germination. You can really see how this hybrid right here struggled to get out of the ground. We've got some late ones. When you feel through here, there's a lot of tip back, very inconsistent ear height. And when you step over here on the right side, very consistent ear height, much more uniform plot, a lot healthier looking corn. I think we'd all be a lot happier with that stand than behind me. So why concern ourselves with all this? Well, this morning Greg mentioned, you know, how do we put on yield? We're talking about girth, length, and depth of the seed kernels on that ear. But if we don't have an ear to start with, it's not going to do us any good. So moving forward, we want to talk about how to take your good stand count and maximize the sunlight utilization on and how to capture the most sunlight based on row spacing and populations and some hybrids. So we're going to move out into the hybrid plot. Well, we've got 4 different populations. We've got 28,000, 42,000, 18,000, and 35,000 on 2 different row spacings, both 20 and 30 inch. 3 hybrids. You guys are sitting right here. So we're going to skip talking the 28 and 42, and we're going to head out, and Aaron Phillips is going to talk to us about the 42 and 18,000 population. So I'll move my easel if you guys don't mind getting up. We're going to head out into the plot, and he's going to discuss with us out there.
So why are we talking about sunlight? Today we are blessed that the sun is shining. You guys might not think so, but it shows us exactly what we're trying to show in our plots here. You guys are standing in 42,000 plant population. From this sign back down there is 20 inches, and from here on down is 30-inch rows. Over on the opposite side is we have 18,000, again 20-inch rows from there down, 30 inches from there down that way. So just visually looking in there, you can see the difference. We're shooting for 97% light interception, and I would say that we're pretty darn close to that when we're looking in the 42,000. When we look in the 18,000, we're not even close. There's a lot more light that is hitting the ground. So what does sunlight do for us? The main thing sunlight does is it fuels photosynthesis. You guys are familiar with this. Photosynthesis allows the plants to make more sugars and starches during grain fill. So what that's going to do is going to give us a more dense kernel, which is going to increase the yields. Sunlight is also very important for cooling. Again, looking at the differences here, we do have the images here on this board. We have 30-inch rows, or 30-inch rows and 20-inch rows, and then 42,000, 35,000, 28,000, and 18,000 plant population. As we go down here and we get to smaller populations, you can see that there's more light that's getting down and hitting the ground. And if you look over here, the thermal images, so how much heat is that producing? Again, as we get down to the lower populations, there's more sunlight, more heat that is hitting the ground, and so that's not what we want. We don't want the plants to have to work any harder than they have to. We want them to be able to cool off and not work as hard. Light interception, it's also important for how much water are we losing. A plant can lose water in two different ways. The first one is from planting to V6. When the sun can hit directly on the ground, we lose water through evaporation. From V6 to R6, then we lose water through transpiration. Again, the light hits the leaves, photosynthesis occurs. On the bottom side of the leaves, where all the pores are, they open up so carbon dioxide can go in, but that also allows water to seep out, and so we lose water that way, and that's transpiration. So the combination of the two, evaporation and transpiration, is evapotranspiration. It's kind of hard to measure that number, but it's going to be anywhere from 0.04 to 0.4 inches per day. So there's different factors that affect that number. One being soil residue. Is there anything that's protecting the ground from the sunlight hitting it directly and the water evaporating? So soil residue. Your soil texture also affects that number, as well as how much water is in the soil profile. Other things that affect it are just climate. If we have high temperatures, do we have high humidity? That's going to affect how much water you lose through, through evapotranspiration. So what do we need to consider when we're trying to figure out the optimum plant population for our field? Row spacing is going to have something to do with it, whether you're on 20-inch spacing or 30-inch. So that's going to come in to be a factor when you're trying to figure out the right population. The hybrids also, what type of ear? Are we going to go with a flex ear, or are we going to go with a determined ear? Again, that's going to be based on different populations and row spacing. And then also the leaf structure. You can see this hybrid here, it's got a lot of vertical leaves up towards the top, which is going to allow the light to come down and then hit these big floppy horizontal leaves around the ear leaf and down. So each hybrid is going to be different. Make sure you're researching the hybrids and pick the one with the right type of ear structure based off of your population and your row spacing. Another important factor to consider is the water holding capacity of your soils. If we look over here where you guys are standing, 42,000 population on the 20-inch spacing. You can see that's just a lot of plants in one area. For the soils that we're in, we can't handle that. It can't sustain it. We're running out of water. You can see the plants are starting to fire and burn up. Compare that to the 18,000. Again, those look great, but again, we're probably not going to plant 18,000 either. So it's knowing what, knowing what type of soils you have and how many plants that it can sustain. If you are going to go with a high population, there are a lot of advantages to that. Everything that we talked about, light absorption, cooling, less evapotranspiration. All that you're going to get with a higher population just because of all the leaf area with it. But you also have some negatives with that as well. All those plants in that small area is going to be, all those plants in that small area is just going to be a hot spot for the disease. We did treat this field with a fungicide back on July 24th, 12 ounces. But as you can see, especially in the 42,000 population, there is quite a bit of gray leaf spot. You can also see that there is halos around the lesions. So the fungicide did do its job, but it was already there when we sprayed. So again, gray leaf spot, diseases like that, they love the high temperatures and the high humidity, just like what we have. You compare this to the 18,000 to the 35,000, it's not near as prevalent in those areas where it was spaced out a little bit more. So here is the 18,000. You can see it's virtually nothing on there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reid, and we're going to head over and check out the 35,000 population area.
This is obviously a very large plot, and it's got all kinds of different things in it, but you know, so if you think about if we did have different soil types, this is all uniform, but what would we have done differently, you know? So say you're at a sandy soil that has real low water holding capacity, you'll probably put out that 25 to 28,000 population, right? But when you do that, you need to make sure that you put a leaf hybrid out there that's going to have a big floppy leaf, right? Because you still want to get that same sunlight utilization. So if it's going to have a lot more space around it, it needs to spread out a lot more, right, to capture all of that. Because you want the same leaf area index that you would have if you were at a 42,000 or a 35,000, right? And your leaf area index is basically, if you're looking for a top-down image, that's going to show you the amount of green surface area per square foot of regular soil around it, right? And I'm not asking you to calculate that. Basically, you just look down inside these rows, and per Ken Ferry's suggestion, what he tells us is that if there's anything that's larger than a basketball, then you're wasting energy and you're wasting sunlight, right? So on the flip side of that, so you do have real dark soils, you do have irrigation or the ability at least to have real nice high water holding capacity. Now you can push your limits. Now you can push that out to that 40,000, maybe that 42,000. When you do that, you're going to go with an ear that's a whole lot tighter. You want that's a lot taller, a lot more upright. And it's going to drive the sunlight down until it gets to these bottom ears, and then they flop out and they capture it. So you're getting that sunlight down towards that ear leaf more than just at the top. So it's just to play to your strengths and play with what you can. In that case, you might put on more of a determinate ear because you know it's never going to have a bad day. You can spoon feed it all the way along because you have the water holding capacity. You can put more nitrogen on when you need to. So this plot is really large, and so what we did on the ear boards here, we'll walk down to them. What we did is we cut it down to one hybrid instead of looking at all three. We try to show the differences in between that. Man, the ones at the bottom, the 18,000 and the 28,000, but especially the 18s look a whole lot nicer than the 35s or even the 42s, right? And that makes sense because these plants right behind you, they have so much room. They have literally everything they could ever want, purely for the fact there's not very many of them out there. So it makes sense. But at the same time, don't be fooled by that, especially in this area. We know we can support more than 18,000. We know we can support more like a 35,000. So if you have the option to put the two out there, that means that the 18,000 has to have twice the kernel volume overall to even come close to competing with the 35,000, right? And so even as nice as those look, I guarantee you they're not twice the size. It's pretty obvious that they're not, right? So make sure that you're playing with the populations that you can to optimize that for you. I'm going to cut this a little bit quicker here and jump over it, but at the same time, look at the yield differences here, right? So you start pretty low and you get a little bit better just because your population is getting higher, but then it kind of peters out, right? The 35,000 looks exactly like the 42,000 does. Doesn't matter if it's on the 20s or the 30s, it looks the exact same. And that's just driving the same point home, right? We already utilized all the sunlight that's there. There's no better sunlight capture in the 42 than there is in the 35, right? We've already used all the water that we have. We've already used all the nutrients and all the nitrogen that we already have. So all we did was we overpaid by 7,000 plants here when we didn't need to, right? So it's once again, it's finding that sweet spot. It's finding that balance. Especially at these later stages where it really starts to show up when you're talking about kernel fill. When we talk about kernel fill, we were looking at this plot about a week and a half ago and we said, you know, what actually matters the most during all of this time? You know, which leaves matter the most? When we're trying to fill out kernels, what do you do? And so what we did was it's right over here to your left. It's those 4 white signs in a row. First one, we took off every single leaf except for the ear leaf. The second one, we flip-flopped it. We just took off the ear leaf. Third one, we took off the top 3 leaves and the ear leaf. And the fourth one, we took off just the top 3 leaves. And you can see the results of it here on this board. They're labeled out as well. We completely stunted it. When you take off all the leaves, it just shows you how much that sunlight matters. It shows you how much that photosynthesis matters. Because if it can't pack anything in there, it's just going to stun it. Literally, those will not go any farther. I'm pretty confident in that. Now, the other 3, this was only done about a week ago. So I'm pretty interested to see what happens here in the next 3 weeks or so. We know from R1 to R4, these were well into R1, well into soaking stage. Now you can see they're starting to, there's a lot of black here, so they're pretty well past that. But you know from R1 to R4, that's where a lot of your late length tip back comes. And then from R4 to R6, that's where your density, your fill, starts to tip back, right? So expect to see these change quite a bit in these bottom 3 before the end of it. So guys, we are running over. They're cutting us a little bit short, but out of interest here, this is all the basics, right? So just understand the saturated cold germ test, understand what it can do for you, and just build yourself a platform that you can then push off from later on, right? So guarantee yourself a decent yield, guarantee yourself a decent, at least a decent start as well as you can, because then you can start turning the knobs. You know, if you've got a higher population, now you can start cranking up the nitrogen if you want to. If you have the ability to put on water, now you can start cranking that up. But make sure that you're giving yourself the best shots you possibly can from the very beginning.